So this video is about my thoughts, trying to wrap my thoughts around how understanding happens. And it's a question that I've been thinking about for a couple of years, and it's led me to a variety of different areas. I've always had an interest in psychology, behavior in general, and it kind of evolved from there into kind of dabbling with very basic elements of neuroscience, very elementary, very beginner. I kind of went into I read a couple of books, handful, not too many. So I think it's a very interesting question, how understanding happens. There doesn't seem to be obviously any clear-cut answer. If there was, then a couple of things would have happened. The technological singularity would have definitely happened because we would have been able to model cognition on a kind of almost like a human level in the machines, and who's to say what happens next? I didn't anticipate the sun was going to be out. It's pretty bright all of a sudden. So so these are kind of if anything, this is just my kind of unscripted, very kind of raw thoughts on trying to unravel the question of how understanding happens. So the baby steps towards understanding how understanding happens, if you may. And my iPad may fall off because it's pretty windy. I'm outside, as you can appreciate. So I'm just going to give it some support. So I guess to begin with, we should really be asking the question of, let's start with an individual. So individual consciousness. Consciousness is a catchphrase. Nobody really knows how to, again, define it, let alone represent it mathematically, or begin to. So consciousness, the best minds in the world, everyone tries. Nobody can explain consciousness. That's a conversation by itself. But so if you kind of look at a individual human being or any other consciousness at that as a system, so you're trying to represent it or begin to define it, then I think it kind of makes sense to start with cognition as something that could be explained more tangibly, as opposed to consciousness, which could be a very wide, potentially it could be a very complex phenomena. And I say that because you have to kind of start going into the realms of things like quantum mechanics and everything we see around ourselves, and even ourselves, we are a kind of a representation of something. My iPad might fall off because it's getting really windy out here all of a sudden. I'm just going to move in closer. But yeah, everything that we see is, even ourselves, we are a kind of a representation of some kind of quantum phenomena. So based on my very limited understanding, quantum phenomena is something that's happening beyond the atomic kind of scale, down to the level of quarks and other particles beyond that, potentially. So everything that we see in this dimension of space-time is a representation of some kind of a quantum phenomena that could be occurring. What we do not know is how many layers, or potentially how many dimensions deep that phenomena is going on for. And kind of summarizing that whole conversation in a bucket, if you may call it, this is what makes me want to make that comment that consciousness could be a very complex phenomena. Obviously that comment is not grounded in science, because we're just scraping the surface based on my understanding of things like quantum mechanics, and in the absence of data to be able to prove or disprove certain theories, that is but just a comment. So consciousness, again, based on my understanding, could be a very, again, complex. Not saying it's impossible to unravel how consciousness could and does emerge, but I think we should. I think I want to be challenged here, but I think we should start with something more simpler, things like cognition and being able to model that, and kind of going from there. One last bit before I kind of move on, and that is that I kind of there's a bunch of different ways. I think we should also kind of look at um, defining reality and how it ought to be continually redefined in light of new information that comes our way. And in that respect, uh, reality could be very different from how we perceive it. And like I'm out here in the middle of the park, and it's quite a scenic place, and spring, and sun is out, and it's kind of cloudy, and but the information that's coming through my senses is limited in respect to my the capabilities that my senses can power. So light has many spectrums, but evolution has kind of designed our senses in a way that we can only filter a certain kind of wavelength, if you want to call it, a couple of spectrums of light. And so the light's hitting the objects, and it's bouncing off the objects, and my vision kind of is set up in such a way that I can kind of have peripheral vision. It kind of, Jeff Hawkins kind of gets into like the bare bones of how the vision system works in his book on intelligence, and there are many other models as well. But basically, my senses are limited to the information that evolution has designed into the construct. So what I mean, and going back to that consciousness discussion, is that reality obviously is much more different than how we perceive it to be. And in this respect, like if using simpler examples, but not too simple, or simple examples, but not too simpler, there could be much more to this reality right now. There's like radio waves flowing through the air. There's potentially radiation coming from the sun. There is like a whole bunch of other spectrums of light that I do not see. There could be other particles in the air that I may not be able to see, other than dust and like the kind of the gases we expect there to be. What else? There could be like a very complex phenomena going on here with the plants and the trees and the grass exhaling gases, and like we are inhaling the oxygen. Just like an infinite variety of complex systems at play here. So like there's the soil, there's bacteria, and other critters or insects, and like all these other. So basically, when it comes to, and then you start building up on those models in a kind of like when it relates to the systems around us. And so I'm sitting here in the middle of Mississauga. It's part of a larger country, which is all like we kind of make that up. But the countries kind of roll up into a planet, and the planet is part of a solar system, and a solar system is part of a galaxy, and a galaxy is part of a universe. And then there's the many worlds interpretation theory, and then there's the possibility that there's many other dimensions. This is not just science fiction. Some of the leading scientists like Michio Kaku are saying that advances in physics is leading to a very possible reality that we've been able to identify. At least, I think last time you mentioned was 14 dimensions could be there, and we're just living in one of those dimensions, which is right now it's a three-dimensional world, but I think we perceive it in a two-dimensional sense. So anyways, going back to that conversation about consciousness, as you can appreciate, if consciousness is in fact a quantum phenomena, then there is that possibility that the origins or the roots of consciousness could be very deep, and they could be deeper than these kind of three dimensions that we perceive. And in that respect, This is kind of like the short debate around consciousness, and it is really short because I think you gotta really kind of, if you want to go define consciousness, you have to, I think in some respects, have to define all the intricate details when it relates to how the universe formed based on kind of like scientific evidence, and then you have to go about defining how life emerged, and then intelligent life, and we're making like really good progress along all those fronts, from kind of like how the origins of the universe to and the theories. It looks like it used to be like the Big Bang theory, but what if it was the universe is the universe that we inhabit could just be a kind of result of two universes colliding together and gives birth to something else, or like, so there's many other ways of kind of looking at that, and kind of all the way up to like here right now, which in Carl Sagan's cosmic calendar terms, we're like in a fraction of, if the whole evolution was 1 year, like we're like right at the 11:59.99 kind of, if the clock went to 12, then that's the fraction of the last second is like a very small fraction of that last second is everything that kind of encapsulates our evolution as a species. We're just like a blip on the radar, or the whole evolution of our species. So that kind of being said, let's get to the actual discussion. And I think I do believe, it's a loaded word, but I strongly suspect that we will have a potential major breakthrough in the realm of how cognition can be modeled and replicated. And I'm going to come back and kind of talk about what makes you, because I think using kind of examples, that's important in order to be able to kind of define a individual kind of cognition and how that's modeled via a collection of different systems, and how I again strongly suspect, I believe that we're going to have a breakthrough when it comes to modeling cognition in some setting, some type or setting, whether it's through like physical means or something in software, or the combination of the two. Before I get into that conversation, I think it's important to think about what makes you, what makes me, and if kind of quickly do like a dialogue, kind of a thought experiment. Say I have a friend Mario, and Mario, I asked Mario, "Hey Mario, who are you?" It's a simple question, right? And Mario, being Mario, my reply, "Hey, it's me, Mario." I couldn't help resist, but kind of inject that in there. But really, like, who is Mario? Is Mario because of his facial expressions, of a certain attribute set when it comes to his dimensions, his height, weight? Again, the facial expression, his personality, his relationships with others, his skill set, combination of all these things, it makes Mario. But is that objective, is the question? Because we're now interested in replicating Mario exactly the way he is, so that for whatever given purpose, right? Or we are interested in replicating you, or we are interested in replicating me. So I think the wider kind of body of I think, I'm not sure, but I think the kind of I think what we're looking for is psychological or cognitive continuity. Because if, say, I have the ability to be able to make Mario in his own image, right? Or anyone at that. So we can make a genetic copy of Mario. It's going to look exactly like Mario. But it won't necessarily have the same point of views. It might not look at the world the same way. And it might not you know, like it may not, it may be a very different version of Mario, but it may look like Mario. So it's like, you know, like you have two twins and they have very different personalities. They're very two distinct people. They're not the same. So, so there's that part, right? Again, what makes Mario Mario? So if, and there's so many ways you can kind of ask that question and get to different answers, and all those answers somehow need to be merged together in order for us to be getting a coherent image or some kind of a model that we could work on and kind of go from there. So based on what we know today, which could be limited, there's a couple of things that makes you you, and that makes Mario Mario. And based on my very limited understanding, those things in a more kind of a objective way would be things like Mario's genetic code, right? Down to everything like the genes expressing themselves in certain attributes, certain even traits, behavioral traits, because we're finding out that there's a genetic disposition towards certain behaviors, but it's not written or set in stone, because also research is suggesting that you can rewire your brain through conscious intent and habit forming and a couple of other things. But yeah, so we have genetics, we have, which is the genome, and we have the biome, which is the microbiota that like kind of exists within our bodies. So our bodies are a collection of, I think last time I checked, I don't know, I'm not sure what number is actually accurate, but I think it's anywhere from 36 to 38 trillion cells in our bodies. Now these are cells, 38 trillion cells that make, like a collection of these cells is what makes you you. Every organ, every tissue, every bone, every nerve, every single component in your body is a cell, or it's comprised of like it finds its underpinning, at least in what we can measure objectively, in something called cells. Obviously, there's some quantum phenomena happening beyond that cellular, atomic, kind of going from cellular to atomic and beyond that level as well. So it kind of goes back to that whole conversation about consciousness. What are we really? Are we a person, or are we a wave? Are we a particle, or are we I don't know. So you know, again, coming back to that conversation, so we've got the genome, we got the biome. So now I was talking about the 38 trillion cells, but turns out apparently there's more biome in your body compared to the actual number of cells. So think about that for a second. You are a collection of 38 trillion cells, but there's more bacteria and other stuff in your body that, and it has an impact on your cognition in some respect. We don't know how, because we're just beginning to understand that. And you know, there's like a couple, I think it's, I don't know how many genes we have in our body, but it's I think it's less than 30,000. I'm not sure about this. I think it's 28,000. But there's the equal larger number of genes that was previously known as junk DNA, but it's turning out that with advanced kind of sequencing techniques, we're learning that's not really junk DNA. So far we've got the genome, we got the biome. There's also something called the connectome. So the connectome is basically a it's basically a kind of like a map of your brain, so to speak. So if you look at your brain, you would say it's gray matter, and it's like really like the cortices kind of folded up, like wrapped up in two hemispheres, and you know, we've got the different brains. You've got the limbic brain and other parts of the brain, left, right, whatever you want to call it, and they all kind of work together somehow to power everything that makes you you, at least from a cognitive point of view, with emotional quotients, sentience, awareness, intelligence quotients, and a whole bunch of other kind of quotients being powered by your sense of cognition. So again, so we've got the genome, we got the biome, we got the connectome. Potentially we might unravel some new discovery, and we might come to the realization that there's more kind of systems, if you want to call it like that, that make you you. But so far, based on our understanding, it is, I think, the connection between the somehow these systems and the subsystems powered within this construct, or this like, if you want to call it, overarching models um, that make you. So in more tangible terms, a unit of a genome is called a gene. So if this is your genome that makes you, you can pay a company like 23andMe or some other company out there. I'm not promoting their services, by the way. I've never used them. I do not vouch for anyone. But if you use a company where you can send your genetic kind of material, like a swab, or like saliva, or I don't know how they do it, they can, for a couple $100, sequence your genes and tell you a couple things about you. Like, I think they can tell you where your genes have been from, in kind of like evolutionary, ancestral kind of point of view, because they can map that using computers now, or advanced genome sequencing things. They can also tell you things like your dispositions towards, I think, certain diseases at the very least. And I think I don't know everything that your the companies like that can actually tell you, but that's like based on your genetic kind of model. So again, a subset of your genetics is called a gene.